Douglas, so good to see you again.
Very good to be with you again.
Thank you. So we're here at the Nova Memorial 1 year later. How does this make you feel?
I come back today, among others, with my friend Nimrod Palmak, who was a great hero of the day, and brought some friends who haven't been here before. So it's, well, I mean, as you know, I mean, it's a terrible mix of emotions, partly just being reminded of the horror of what happened here. In my case, I also always think of the people who were so heroic on that day. I think of all the hostages who are still there in Gaza, and I think of all the soldiers who've been working so hard and who I've seen working for the past 14 months, and so, yeah, a lot.
So let's start with the war in Israel. What do you think about the ceasefire in Lebanon?
Well, it's not mine to say, but I know that wiser voices know more. I just have always said since the beginning of this conflict that I want it to be the last Gaza war and the last Lebanon war. And I don't see anything other than total victory as being possible. I really have felt very strongly that, as you know, as all Israelis know, every few years you have to fight a Gaza war, every 15 to 20 years you have to fight a Lebanon war, and I really hope that whatever is happening in Lebanon, the decimation of Hezbollah, I don't want to see the decimation of 90% of it, I want to see the decimation of 100%.
Do you think the ceasefire agreement with Lebanon was a gesture for President Trump's return to the White House?
Some people interpret it as that. I'm not sure I believe in the ceasefire, to tell you the truth. I don't think Hezbollah will be able to restrain themselves. And I think of all my friends in the north of Israel who spent the last year and more out of school, out of their homes, and I don't know that they feel yet that this is safe to go back. And until they are safe to go back, I don't believe a ceasefire is important. The important thing is the families, the displaced families of Israel returning home. That's what I think.
Yeah.
It's the only guide.
What do you think about the ICC arrest warrants against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant?
Well, it's preposterous. Preposterous. I've written about it a fair amount in the last few months since April, when I think I broke the story that the ICC was going to dare to do this. It's astonishing and not surprising. I'm very glad that Israel never signed up to the ICC. I'm very glad that America never signed up to it. My own country of birth, Great Britain, unfortunately did sign up to it. And I think they'll learn in due course what the ramifications are of allowing this appalling international body to decide that it can legislate over the behavior of democracies in wartime. The court is a joke. It's a kangaroo court. I mean, they've announced, of course, they tried to announce that there would be the arrests of various Hamas leaders. It seems to have escaped the attention of the ICC that Hamas has very few leaders, and that the one they've mentioned is already dead. In my view, I said this in the New York Post the other week, it's like saying at the end of World War II, we're going to prosecute the Nazi leaders and also Harry Truman and Winston Churchill. And then, oh well, all the Nazi leaders are dead, let's just prosecute the American and British prime ministers and presidents. It's disgusting. It's disgusting, and I hope that with the arrival of President Trump in the Oval Office, whatever to me, the scandal in a way was not just the pathetic European countries who were saying, and the pathetic Canadian government and others saying that they would even dare to think of carrying out an arrest warrant against a democratically elected leader. But it was the fact that there were so many signals that somehow Washington, it wasn't that it was green lighting the process, but it didn't red light it. And when Senator Tom Cotton and other senators wrote to the ICC corrupt prosecutor, Karim Khan, who has his own personal reasons to bring this case, as we know, when they wrote to him, they reminded him of this, that and I hope that President Trump will remind people of this, that under American law, under the Hague Invasion Act, it's not just that if an international court like the ICC tries to go for an American that they're in trouble, but if they try to go for an American ally, they're in trouble as well. And I hope that they really are.
How do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu should act?
Well, I think he's done very well so far. I mean, my view is that, and a lot of my friends in the army here have said to me in recent days since the arrest warrants were issued, but we'll all be next. And I think they're right. I think they're right to be fearful of that. If you can try to arrest the Prime Minister and a former Defence Minister, then you can arrest generals. And there will be some people, of course, who will think, oh, well, it's just about Netanyahu. I remember when Tzipi Livni, who is not, to my recollection, a person of the right, I remember when Tzipi Livni was barred from entering the UK some years ago because of her involvement in the Second Lebanon War. This will come for everybody. It'll come for everybody. And that includes elected leaders in the rest of the West. I think Netanyahu's done a very good job in reminding people of that. And then, of course, there's been a significant amount of backtracking from people like Emmanuel Macron. Even Giorgia Meloni has backtracked a bit from initially saying that she would, that Italy would observe the arrest warrants, and now seems to have rowed back. Again, only my own country of birth, Great Britain, where we have a particularly idiotic foreign secretary, a man of very, very minimal intelligence, has said that he has to, and that Britain will have to, observe the arrest warrant. Of course, it doesn't have to at all. This is just a political act by the left-wing government in Britain. But again, those people will find this will come for them in due course. If democratically elected leaders and generals and others are able to be hauled in front of this Kangaroo international body, it'll be a Labour Prime Minister next, maybe even a former Labour Prime Minister. One springs to mind.
And also we hear former Israeli officials saying Israel is committing genocide, ethnic cleansing, just to bring Prime Minister Netanyahu down. What do you think about it?
Well, there have been people who've been making these smears against Israel and against the IDF from the beginning of the war and indeed before it. I think the first people claiming that Israel was committing genocide in Gaza were saying it on October the 8th, when, of course, the Gazans and Hamas were trying to commit a genocide in Israel still. They've been making these smears and allegations against this country for years, decades indeed now. I do think it's very important that people realize that this has to be cut off at the root. You know, some people think, oh, we can pass this blame onto this person, or we can pass this allegation onto that person, or sell this person down the river. No, all of these allegations, they hit at the core, the roots of Israel. They are intended simply to delegitimize the country we're sitting in. They want to claim that this country commits genocide when it does not. They want to claim that it's doing ethnic cleansing when it's doing anything but. They want to claim this is an apartheid state when it's anything but. But these allegations, they have to be cut off at the root. And by the way, one of the reasons why they do them, and I've said this a few times in the last year, they make these specific allegations because they want to hurt Jews. I don't think people reflect on that enough. They say things like concentration camp and genocide and Holocaust.
Do you think
none
the
of
IDF
which
is committing genocide in Gaza?
Of course not. Of course not. I mean, this is these libels against the IDF and against the state of Israel. And they just libel after libel. And you know, there's this phrase I've tried to make a bit more well known in the last year. Vasily Grossman, the great Soviet Jewish writer of the 20th century, he said once, he said about anti-Semitism, he says, tell me what you accuse the Jews of, and I'll tell you what you're guilty of. Wow. Now, the people claiming that Israel is committing genocide are people who want to commit genocide. The Iranians, the revolutionary Islamic government in Tehran and all of its proxies, they accuse Israel of colonialism. It is the mullahs who are colonialists as we speak. They've been colonizing For decades, they've colonized Iraq, they've colonized Lebanon, they've colonized Yemen, they've colonized Syria. They dare to accuse Israel of colonialism. Every time this rule of Vasily Grossman's holds, what they accuse Israel of, they are guilty of. When Hamas say Israel is committing genocide, it's because Hamas wants to commit genocide. This is a cast iron rule.
Do you think there is a safe place for Jews?
Well, the great thing that I think we're reminded of in places like where we are here is that we got a glimpse on the 7th of what would happen again to the Jewish people, but for one thing, which is the IDF, the abilities of Jews to defend themselves. In the Second World War, Jews didn't have the ability to defend themselves. In 15th century Spain, Jews didn't have the ability to defend themselves. Here in Israel, Jews have the ability to defend themselves, and they do. And I've been with the IDF in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, in Lebanon, and mistakes, terrible mistakes were made on October the 7th. But every hour of every day since, the brave young men and women of this country, and some a little older than young as well, as with a friend yesterday back in reserves in his 50s. But these brave men and women are fighting every day to defend the Jewish state, the Jewish people. And all the smears and all of the rest of the libels, that means nothing compared to that. As for Jews in the diaspora, that's difficult. If you look at events like the horrible pogrom in Amsterdam the other week, we have a very, very difficult thing in the diaspora and in the West outside of Israel in general, which is that some people are able to identify who the modern day victims are, the Jews. Very few people are willing to say who the modern day Nazis are. Very few, actually. I think I count as one among very few in the Western media. But, when you see something like this terrible event in Amsterdam, even some Jewish organizations in Europe, they say this was a spontaneous attack on Israeli soccer fans by locals.
Or they're blaming the fans.
Oh, they blame the fans, of course. Because every Jew brings all violence on themselves, of course. But it's noticeable, isn't it, that they say they were attacked by locals. I say, who are the locals? Are these Dutch citizens in their clogs running out of windmills and starting to attack Jews? No. This is, sadly, there are anti-Semites in Europe from the native population, but we also have the massive problem that we've imported a lot of new immigrant anti-Semites, mainly from Muslim background. And that's in terms of diplomacy and international relations for this country. That's a problem. But the problem, the problem is principally not for this country. It's a problem for countries like the Netherlands, a problem for countries like Britain, a problem for countries like Canada. Why is it that the same Hamas markers for Jewish houses are being used against an owner of a bookshop in Sydney who happens to be Jewish, and a professor in Canada, and so on? This is a problem for these countries, and I at any rate think that for all the problems that Israel faces, all the problems that occur here and will always occur, and all the arguments and internal debate, at least here you can defend yourselves. And it's not clear to me how much of the rest of the West wants to do that for themselves.
How do you think President Trump will act differently from President Biden regarding the war in Israel?
Well, one of the virtues of President Trump is he tends to say what he thinks. It's quite, people quite often say to me, what does Trump think about this? I say, you can tell, he'll have said it in a speech, Yeah. President Trump will, I think, have a very different attitude towards this country and this war. He definitely wants the war to stop. He's said that many times, like the war in Ukraine. But I think he also realizes that what I've, again, said from the beginning, which is Israel has to win. It's not tolerable to have these endless wars forced upon Israel and the Israeli public. I'm hoping very much that Trump follows through on his promise to throttle the mullahs financially. Very much hoping that happens. Because at the end of his first term in office, that really was the case. The mullahs were begging for relief of the sanctions. And Biden, of course, gave it to them. And we've seen in the last 4 years what happens when Tehran is...
It's ours.
It's ours. It's ours. I'm used to the sound of outgoing. You know, Trump tried to throttle the mullahs financially, and it worked. Biden turned the money spigots on, and we've seen what happens when the mullahs have money. We can see from Yemen to Lebanon to Gaza to everywhere. And you know, if when Trump comes in, the mullahs can be sanctioned back, and this country takes whatever measures it has to take, and I have thoughts on that like all of us, then I think we could be on the road to winning.
Me too. I have a really good feeling.
I know. I think that for the first time in many years, there is a possibility of victory in sight. And it's what Prime Minister Netanyahu said at the United Nations the other week in New York, and I was there in the audience. And as he said, you know, there are these two options for the Middle East, the blessing and the curse. It's eminently possible now to see what a blessed Middle East will look like. You know, we have the Abraham Accords, countries could be added to it. We could have normalization, de-radicalization of populations like that in Gaza. All of these things are possible. But then there's the curse, and the origin of the curse is obviously Tehran. And we'll see. But it's a very straightforward choice, that, and for the sake of this country and the wider region, as well as for the citizens of Iran, I hope that something can be done.
Do you think his election will affect the balance of power in the Middle East and Islamization in the West?
I think so. Islamization in the West is a harder thing to predict. It's a harder thing to deal with. This region, yes. Trump has his own forms of diplomacy, which are... you know, it's very interesting. People often think that foreign policy is a very complicated art. And in some ways it is, but in some ways it isn't. And one of the things that Trump knows is that in foreign policy terms, your friends should know that they're your friends, your allies should know they're your allies, and your enemies should really know they're your enemies. And I believe that Trump has a deterrent ability which very few recent American presidents have had. Maybe Ronald Reagan was the last one.
In your opinion, what is the biggest threat on democratic countries in the world?
I would say that it's in part the radicalization of young people into vicious belief systems and lies. I think of people like the idiot students in America who've been brought up to... I've just finished a new book. It comes out in April. It's called On Democracies and Death Cults.
Wow, that was my next question.
And that's something I've thought about a lot. How come we're in this situation? It's like what I said about people not being able to identify the Nazis today. And I tell you, by the way, very quickly where it comes from. It comes from a taught self-loathing. It's a taught self-loathing. One of the things I love about Israel is, in spite of all the internal debates, much of which I hear over Friday night dinners and other dinners, you know, fundamentally, Israelis believe in the state of Israel. And I remember some years ago, shortly before his death, Henry Kissinger and I were talking, and I just came across it in one of my notebooks the other day, a note I made to myself that Henry said, you were talking about America and American education. He said, it's not clear to me that a country that hates its past has any future. And I think that's absolutely right. And I want to turn that around. And it's one of my self-appointed tasks to try to help do so. I want the West to be proud of itself. I want people to realize when they're growing up in countries like America and Britain that we have been great forces for good in the world. We've done bad things, but everybody does. But on balance, we're a force for good. The Western democracies, the free world, are a force for good. And if we can get that back, that sense of it's not just pride, it's just common sense, then everything could turn around.
I have to ask you, are you considering going into politics?
In which country?
Ours, hopefully. Hopefully in Israel.
I think I'd have to find a very corrupt rabbi to find someone in my distant family. I'm afraid I have not located any Jewish ancestry, and so. No, I do recognize that Israeli politics is a contact sport, rather like driving in this country. Best to stay out of it.
I watched you and Ben Shapiro at the Herut event.
Oh, you were there?
I was literally crying. I was speechless.
That was such a lovely evening.
Yeah, for long minutes, people stood and applauded you and Ben and didn't let you speak. How was the feeling of receiving so much love from the Israeli audience?
Well,
Look, I'm crying.
Yeah, you're going to make me cry. You know, I say all the time that I'm deeply moved by that response and by the responses I have had from the Israeli public. I feel like many Israelis have taken me to their heart and I've taken them to mine. And I say, you know, it's a reciprocal thing, and I've really learned this in the last year. Sometimes, you know, in Gaza or Lebanon or anywhere else, sometimes soldiers say to me, "You give us encouragement," and I'm so proud to hear that. But I say to them always, and it's absolute truth. I said, "But you don't understand. You give me encouragement. It's a two-way street." You know, and I just feel that there's something great that can be done about that by all of us. You know, I was doing an event in Jerusalem again the other night, and I met these parents two sets of parents whose sons have died in the last year, one on the 7th in Bethlehem, one since in Gaza. And when somebody said something nice about me on stage, and I said, you know, I appreciate this, but I also feel frankly ridiculous, because there are people, everybody in this country has made a sacrifice, a real sacrifice. I just use words. I just say what I think and write what I think. But I look around this country and I see millions of people, many of whom have given the ultimate sacrifice. And that's what that's what gives me encouragement. That's what fills me with admiration. So I feel if I get applause or a standing ovation, I want to hand it back to the audience. It's there. It's them that deserves it. It
you
really
deserve it
is
also.
them.
But you are also deserve it. This is your tool. You are our voice in the world, and this is
You have
much
many
important.
voices. You have many
You are
voices.
one of them,
Well,
and thank you.
It's my honor to be one of them.
So you have a solo performance this week as part of your world tour that you're doing. Do you have a small teaser for us?
Sure, I've been, it's at the Bronfman Theatre at the Tel Aviv Culture Center on December the 4th. There was a 9 o'clock show that sold out, but there are tickets still for the 6 p.m. show. It's an adaptation of what I've been doing. I've been doing in America and elsewhere. I've been showing original footage from my period in the aftermath of the 7th and educating audiences about what happened here. Israelis don't need that bit. So it's very much a new show. But I'm hoping that it'll give people encouragement, pride, some laughs along the way, hopefully, because we always have to be able to laugh amid the tragedy. But yes, it'll be a really great evening, and I'm really looking forward to sharing it with my friends in Israel.
What is your message for the Israeli people?
Stay strong.
Amazing.
Stay strong. The world needs you. The world needs you, and good people are on your side.
Douglas Murray, it's always a pleasure.
It's
Thank
my
you
pleasure.
so much for everything.
Thank
Really
you.
much appreciated.
Thank you.